Well, okay. Well, in previous class, we came to know about what is quality management and what are the different parameters we need to monitor to achieve the better quality environment management program. Also, we have discussed about the basic history about the ISO 14000, and we came to know that it is the management tool which will help us to assess the impact of the environment, uh, uh, as well as the impact of the activities or the actions by the mankind on the environment. So through this based EMS practices, we can evaluate whether the measures adopted and the correctiveness put in place are turning out to be effective or not. So thus, in the way we can say the process of minimizing the environmental impacts goes on, and all these aspects comprise half the story of the environment quality management, and other aspects is dedicated to the EMS system. In our case, we are going to learn about the ISO 14000 standards and environmental labeling. So we use standards all the time without too much thought. So we can communicate because of the standardization of the different parameters, like standardization of the technical units we are using in the measurement or in the uh, context of the technical stream. So even the Chinese people can understand what is meant by feet or meter or mile. So it is universally accepted. So 1 liter of water in Delhi is equals to 1 liter of water in Mumbai, or 1 liter of milk in Mumbai is equal to the 1 liter of milk in other parts of the country. So likewise, we know that it is uniformly accepted standards and very essential for the widespread marketability, even for the efficient production and the use of the products. So ISO 14000 and ISO 9000. So these standards are internationally accepted series, and you might have seen a whole lot of products and the services which are already tagged with the either of these series of standards. So we frequently use ISO 14000, 9000, 12000 products be- because these products are, we used to say, it is continuously monitored for quality and for the other environmental aspects. So this 9000 series pertains to quality management as well as the quality assurance, and this 14000 standards being relevant to the present topic of our discussion, that is environment. We also learn about the genesis of the 14000 standards because it got originated in the 1960s when there was worldwide concern for the environment began. But in 1992, the United Nations Conference on Environment and Development, UNCD, which is also known as the Earth Summit, took place in Brazil, Rio de Janeiro, and it came in the enforcement. So preparation for this conference and the subsequent related topics led to the development of some uniform internationally accepted environmental management standards. And subsequently, they established the International Organization for Standardization, which we know as the ISO, and they created the ISO Technical Committee in 1992. So this ISO, International Organization for Standardization, is a worldwide federation of the national standards body, and it comprising right now 130 members, and it headquartered in Geneva, Switzerland. The original body, ISO body, got established in 1947, and the main objective to establish that body was to promote the development of standardization and the related activities, In the world, keeping in view to facilitate exchange of goods and services in a better way and to develop the organization structure in such a way that the both organization and environment could be taken care of. We also discuss few things about the India. India is a full member because there are three modes of the membership, three categories. A full member. So a full member is having their own national body, which is designated by its respective country in ISO, and they are going to represent it. Most nations are represented by the full member. So even in the India, we are having the ISO as a separate national body, and this body is representing at a international level. And whereas if the nation doesn't have the standardization bodies, then they may be represented by the correspondent member. So there is no full-time standard body or national body working over there, and the country could get the correspondent membership in a ISO. Whereas there may be some small nations with a very small economy, they may become a subscriber member. So only full members are allowed to participate in the development of the standards, whereas the correspondent member and the um, subscribed member are not allowed to participate, but they will be informed about the standards which are proposed with the meeting in a full body members. Now, all these things we have discussed today, let us move inside the ISO 14000 series. It is going to start from checking or the corrective actions, and then again with a continuous improvement cycle will came to checking and corrective actions. So let us say we know about, or you may recall that this ISO 14000 series is about the EMS, Environmental Management Standards, in which basics of how to establish documentation or implementation and maintenance of an effective environmental system is defined. So these standards are indeed, intended to achieve the improved environmental results by adopting a particular management process rather than by coercion from the regulations. So let us first of all see what is the management process. So I'm going to basics about the management. What is the role of the management? So let us understand the each and every term in this ISO 14000 standards. Okay. What is management? What is the management process? Objective of the management that we must know to understand the ISO 14000. So this management process involves of certain fundamental functions, and one useful classification is the managerial function involved in it. It contains the different stages like planning, organizing, staffing, directing, coordinating or controlling, budgeting, delegation of authorities as well as the leading. All these aspects comes under the management process. So when we combine all these views, the unit will become a managementally strong. So this process is very distinct, and it consists of various functions of management so that they can determine and accomplish the stated objectives of their company. These objectives may be fulfilled by the humankind and other resources. So there are basically three aspects involved in the management. It is the management is a social process, it is an integrating process, and also it is a continuous process. Social, integrating, as well as continuous process. So what is social process? because peoples are always at the center of each and every management process. So when it is in the development state, keeping in mind that peoples will be playing the important role, all the processes to be developed. So people are central in the process of the development, and human factor is the very most important factor when we have to develop the management process. So, as managers of the developmental programs are concerned with developing relationship among the people, we can say it is the social process, and it is the duty of the manager to make the interaction and conversations between people for attaining the developmental goals. So, each company is having their goal. To satisfy the goal, they design a structure, they design a separate process, and people, employees, as well as the community nearby the plant as well as the stakeholders are at the center part of this process. That's why we can say management is a social process. Then management is an integrating process, because when the manager undertakes the job of bringing together human being with the physical and the financial resources. So earlier it was a social process. Now this social process needs to be combined with the environment, or we can say the physical and the financial resources, so as to achieve the different purpose on or goals of the company. So as it is an important function to bring harmony between the various resources, living and the non-living resources, and integrate them to attain the development goals, then we can say the management is an integrating process. Then third one is about the continuous process. So it is continuous. It is never ending process. It is running through the cycle and concerned with constantly identifying the development problems and solving them by taking the adequate measures. So corrective actions are going on. Some modification, rectification, and implementation is going on, and it is the never ending process. So we have to say management is a continuous process. Okay, you can also understand from this figure too what are the objectives of the management. So we can define the objectives of the management in a very short and brief manner. So first and most important objective is getting maximum results with minimum efforts. So this basically concern with the thinking and utilizing the resources, human, material, financial, physical resources. So they are using all these resources in a such a manner that will result in best combination to secure the maximum output with minimum efforts and resources. So getting maximum results with minimum effort is one of the objective, or second objective we can state as increasing the efficiency of factors of production, because proper utilization of the various factors of production, their efficiency can be increased to a great extent, which can be obtained by reducing the spoilage or exploitation, wastage, and breakage of all kinds. So it is the efficiency increment for the production, or maximum prosperity is another objective of the management, because management also ensures smooth and coordinated development and helps in providing the maximum benefits to the people. So it is the maximum prosperity that could be achieved. Then human betterment and the social justice can be stated as a another objective. Just give me 1 minute. हा समर्थ. बरं बरं. नाही, संडेला यार बंद असतं, पण मी नाही का बोलून ठेवतो इकडे. हा, म्हणजे तुला डायरेक्ट हॉस्टेलला सोडता येईल त्यांना. म्हणजे मी बोलून ठेवतो इथे, मला फक्त व्हॉट्सअप रिमाइंड कर जरा दुपारी. हा, व्हॉट्सअप करशील मला, मी तुझं काय ऍडमिशनचं आहे ना ते बोलून ठेवतो इथे. आणि समजा त्यांनी म्हटलं की अगोदर पेमेंट वगैरे करा, तर ऑनलाईन पेमेंट एक करून टाका मग, म्हणजे तुझं ऍडमिशन इथे करून टाकतो मी. म्हणजे कसं तुला रविवारी जर येता आलं तर डायरेक्ट आपलं हॉस्टेलला यायचं, रूम घ्यायची, सोमवारपासून कॉलेज. असं आहे चालू आहे ना. दुपारी मी काय करतो, ऑफिसमध्ये जातो आणि तुला फोन करतो तिथे. तुला काय ऍडमिशन समजा त्यांनी म्हटलं की काय थोडेफार पैसे भरावे लागतील ऍडमिशनसाठी, कन्फर्मेशनसाठी, रूम अलॉटमेंट वगैरे ते आपण बघून घेऊया. तुला फोन करतो. ओके, काही प्रॉब्लेम नाही ना. हां हां, चालेल. ओके. So betterment and social justice is one of the objective we can state for the management. So actually, what is the use of management? How it is going to help the company? सगळ्यात मोठा ऑब्जेक्टिव्ह आहे की इट इज गोइंग टू अचीव दी ग्रुप गोल्स, because it arranges all the goals, organize and integrate the resources in an effective manner, so that the goals could be achieved. So direct group efforts toward the achievement of the predetermined goals can be established through management, and by defining objectives of development clearly, we can say there will be no wastage of time, money, and the effort. So management is essential. Also, it will help to have the optimum utilization of the resources. Sometimes it will help to reduce the cost and establishes the sound organization and equilibrium among the all stakeholders. So it adapts the organization to changing demand of people, changing needs of society, and we can say they are going to attain the equilibrium. So we have seen that this ISO contains the management, whole of the management. It is very much important while implementing the EMS. Okay. Now, just coming to the insights of the ISO, we recall that this ISO 14,000 series is about the environmental management standards, and it is used to establish, document, or implement and maintain the effective environmental system in the organization. So basically, these standards are intended to achieve the uh, improved environmental results by a based management process rather than by enforcing the regulation on the company. So it is internationally accepted, these standards, and it will reduces the duplication of the efforts. Besides creating a level playing field, therefore the standards improve the international trade by reducing also the trade barriers. It can be applied here. It is given. It can be applied the by any organization. It may be public organization or the private organization, large or small, doesn't matter. Anyone can apply the ISO 14,000 standard. Even any small or micro organization which may have some kind of a impact on the environment, they can also adopt the EMS through 14,000. Compliance, see, it doesn't ask about the compliance, it asks about the standardization of the process. So compliance to ISO 14,000 is not mandatory, but the trends indicate that customers will mandate in near future compliance with ISO 14,000, and even now compliance offers a competitive advantage to the suppliers. So compliance is not mandatory, but it could add some extra benefits to the suppliers, because consumers are asking for not only for the best management or other practices, but also compliance with the environmental regulation. So although it is not necessarily mandatory, but it could be adapted in the effective application of EMS. So an organization with commitment of this ISO 14000, it indicates that it is dedicated to the various principles and the implements of the environmental management standards. So those companies which are affiliated or got the certification of ISO 14000, it means they are having some dedicated principles toward the environment management. So with an eye on the sustainable development and an efficient environmental performance, they can achieve and implement the ISO 14000. This means the organization is making sure that their all activities or the products as well as the services are good for the mankind and the world on the whole. So it consists of this consists of the different factors in it. This ISO 14000 series consists of organization and the process standards. So EMS, environmental performance evaluation, and environmental auditing. Then it contains the product oriented standards. सगळ्यात अगोदर काय येईल की ऑर्गनायझेशन स्टँडर्ड्स काय, प्रोसेस स्टँडर्ड्स काय. Then it will be a product oriented standards like life cycle assessment of the product or environmental labeling of the product, environmental aspects in product standards, and third part consists of terms and definitions. Okay, it is consists of only three parts: organization and product standards, sorry, process standards, product oriented standards, and terms and definitions. So two types of ISO 14000 series documents include the specification of the standards and the guidance standards. These are the two types of ISO 14000 series documents. What is specification standards? It describes the requirements against which a facility will be audited for registration certification purposes. And a guidance standards will then offer the instructions to implement the EMS and its relationship with the other system. So let us take a look. It's very simple. It could be having the different streams involved in it: process oriented, product oriented, environmental management system to it, or environmental labeling. जी EMS जी असते ती EMS ला याच्यामध्ये या स्टँडर्ड मध्ये दिलेला 14001 and 14004. It suggests about the guidelines for EMS, whereas environmental labeling, दोन पार्ट तुम्ही त्याचे करू शकता. लेफ्ट साइडला जर तुम्ही इमॅजिन केलं की इट इज दी ऑर्गनायझेशन अँड प्रोसेस स्टँडर्ड्स, आणि राईट साइडला जे आहे ते प्रॉडक्ट स्टँडर्ड्स आहेत. तर लेफ्ट साइडला ऑर्गनायझेशन आणि प्रोसेस स्टँडर्ड्स मध्ये काय येईल की EMS, environmental auditing and environmental performance evaluation, which is in regard with the organization and the process oriented standards, whereas in the right side you will be having the environmental labeling under product standards or life cycle assessment of the product and environmental aspects in product standards. तर त्याच्यासाठी वेगवेगळे सिरीज आहे त्याची. EMS साठी 14001, 14004 आहे. ऑडिटिंग साठी जर बघितलं तर 14010 and 14011 आहे. 14012, 13, 14 up to 15. Environmental performance evaluation साठी ISO 14031 आहे. All this will be shown to you later. इन्व्हायरमेंटल लेबलिंगसाठी 14,020 आहे, लाईफ सायकल असेसमेंटसाठी 14,040 आहे आणि इन्व्हायरमेंटल आस्पेक्ट्स साठी ISO गाईडलाईन 64 आहे. And terms and definition are included in ISO 14,050. Okay, so you can imagine that this ISO system is divided into basic parts. Left side you can have the process and organization, and right side it will be product. So all the aspects of the product to be manipulated in the right side, whereas with the process and the organization it could be manipulated in the left side, and accordingly the series are mentioned to you. Okay. Here this is the difference between the EMAS and ISO 14001. You can see here the different policies as well as the programs enforced by both these auditing schemes. Okay. I'm going to explain it. This is the series. Whatever I was talking about, you can see here products and management standards, evaluation and the auditing tools. So evaluation and auditing is for the process and the organization, whereas product support tool is mentioned here, environmental labeling, life cycle assessment, and the at the center you can see the management system standards, which are EMS specifications in ISO 14001 and EMS guide is 14004. It is also related with the process and organization. आणि टर्म्स अँड डेफिनेशन जे आहे त्या 14,050 मध्ये मेन्शन केलेले आहे आणि इन्व्हायरमेंटल अस्पेक्ट्स ऑफ प्रॉडक्ट स्टँडर्ड इज अंडर द ISO गाईड 64. Okay, so this is the actual structure of the ISO 14,000 standardization. So it is what we can say a systematic approach to deal with the environmental aspects of an organization. Now let us explain bit by bit about the details of each and every part of this ISO 14,000. It is also a tool that enables an organization of any size or any type to control the impacts of its activities, products, or services on the natural environment. And this ISO 14,000 standard environmental management system is what it is the standard within the ISO 14,000 series. म्हणजे EMS is what it is a, I already told you it is the half story of the best management practices or the environmental management standards. So it is the part of this EMS. It provides a structured framework based on which an organization perform its functions, and these functions are related to the environmental management. Its allocation of the resources, assignment of the different tasks, and improvement of the procedures and the processes all comes under the framework, organizational framework. So it includes the environmental policy, planning, implementation and operation, checking and corrective action. This is the figure. Okay. Policy, planning, implementation and operation, checking and corrective actions, management review, and continual improvement or continuous improvement. This ISO 14,010 or 11 and 12, all these three series describe the general principles of the environmental auditing guideline to audit the EMS and qualification requirement for the environmental auditors. What is the role of auditing? Why we need it? it we required auditing to find out whether the processes put in place to improve the compliance are working or not, and verify the efficiency of the management reviews so that we can capture the effectiveness of the EMS. For that purpose, auditing is essential. So the performance evaluation is a very important and key feature of this EMS. So the management monitor the performance from time to time, and they ensure that the policy goals objective, because in the policy we are defining the goals, objectives and targets. So this policy goals, objectives and targets are to be met or not, that is decided by the management review. So the performance indicators are presented for in ISO 14031. So policy, environmental aspects, compliance requirements, objectives and the targets, programs are all included in the environmental policy. In the planning, we are uh, checking the environmental aspect, compliance, objectives, targets, environmental management programs. Then in the implementation, roles and responsibilities, training and communication, EMS document control, emergency preparedness, and in the corrective actions, monitoring, measurement, non-conformance of EMS, and corrective actions. Even the auditing can be included in checking and corrective actions. I will briefly explain you, because I told you that this is to be learned with two different aspects. ISO 14000 as well as the environmental labeling. Although environmental labeling is not part of your syllabus, it is most of all it is focused on the products, because manufacturers are need to communicate environmental attributes of their products through labeling. So it is very much essential and we should know something about it. Green labeling, we can call it as a green labeling, or you may use the word eco labeling, green labeling or eco labeling, and manufacturers are communicating through this labeling of their products through the environment to the environment. These environmental or the green labeling programs are introduced in number of countries. Several countries are using this eco labeling or green labeling concept, so that they can help their customers to identify the environment friendly products. So these labels are in a different formats and they display the various kinds of the product specific information. For example, Germany or West Germany. So Germany was the first country to launch environmental labeling of products, and they introduced the Blue Angel labeling program in 1978. Later on, the other countries like Austria, Canada, Denmark, France, India, Japan, Korea, New Zealand, Norway, Singapore, and most of the USA, Sweden, Spain, most of the European countries are also started their green labeling program, and they define it or they use these special logos to communicate with the consumers. So there is a global network of the countries, GEN, global network of countries that have eco-labeling schemes. In India, we are having the CPCB, Central Pollution Control Board, which is a member of this global network of the countries, GEN. So from 2000, we are a full member of the chain, and the purpose of green labeling is to steer consumers towards green or environmental friendly products, and also encourage the consumers as well as the manufacturers to develop such products with green labeling. And debates are on about the dangers of misusing eco labeling criteria. That debate is going on, but it is none of our concern. We must have to understand what is the eco labeling or the green labeling. So what these green labels indicate? It gives the credible and accurate information about the environment friendly properties of the product, and they also indicate that the label product is relatively environmentally less harmful than the others in the same category. That is what the purpose of green labels, because most products harm the environment during some way or other way or during phases of their entire life cycle. So there are only a very few products that are considered environmentally benign, environmentally friendly. So therefore, making such relative evaluations will require the estimates that take into account a product's overall environmental impact. Some examples you can see or you can observe with the labels like energy efficient product or CFC free. CFC free means chlorofluorocarbon free product, or ozone friendly product, or flammable product, or ecotoxic, or biodegradable plastic bags, CFC free deodorants, or aerosols. So all these are the examples of eco labeling or the green labeling, and these programs follow similar basic procedure to identify the product group to be labeled. Light bulb. So light bulbs or printing papers. The life cycle assessment for such things can be done to identify the areas of the maximum environmental impacts. So about 90% of the environmental consequences arising from the washing machine occur during the use stage. It is just an example we are considering life cycle analysis. Therefore, the criteria to award the green labels for washing machines generally are based on the use related environmental impacts, because hazards is done when it is in use. So, while using, what needs to be done, how the impact is to be reduced. So, public comments are also considered while making the final decision about awarding the criteria of the eco labeling. So this green labeling typically involves the charges and is valid for a fixed duration if you want to obtain it for the product. And it's just the overview of the award of the green labeling program. And EcoMark schemes of India is there to take care of all these awarding process. So if you set up a company and you want to get a eco label or green label to your product, you have to approach to EcoMark schemes of India. Okay, this is just a brief information about the green or eco labeling. Let us move towards the ISO 14001. What is this ISO 14001? We can see it here, EMS specification. And in the EMS specification, this is just a ISO 14001 elements which is shown in this slide. Okay, it contains how much phases? 5 phases. So one by one, just go through it. We will go through it and try to understand the ISO 14000 elements. So the first one, we will start with establishment of an appropriate environmental policy. You can start with because when does it apply, it will be getting started with the corrective actions for the existing process. But when you newly want to adapt it, it will start with setting up the goals. So environment policy is the first here uh, thing from where we are going to start. So there should be the establishment of an appropriate environmental policy first, which will have the documentation and communication to the employees, and it will be made available to all the public. Sometimes it may include a commitment to continual improvement and the pollution prevention. What are your goals, objectives, and the targets? It should be clearly and concisely mentioned in the environmental policy. Also, the improvement phase and the pollution prevention of that organization, regulatory compliance, and a framework for setting the objectives. All these things are to be mentioned in the environmental policy. Then second phase is the planning phase in implementation of ISO 14001. So this planning phase covers the identification of the environmental aspects of the organizational activities, also the identification and access to the legal requirements, establishment and documentation of the objectives and the targets which should be consistent with the policy, and also the establishment of a program for achieving the defined targets and objectives. It includes all the designation of the responsible individuals, necessary means, and the time frames. So planning require a lot of efforts in EMS because you are now identifying the different environmental aspects, its activity, legal requirements, consistency with meeting the targets, or the establishment of the different programs for achieving the set targets and objectives. It is very lengthy process, and we do need some corrective measures to implement the best planning phase. Implementation and operation. The third phase of the EMS, it includes the definition, documentation, communication of roles and responsibilities, provision of appropriate training is also there, assurance of the adequate internal and external communication, written management system documentation, and it also includes the appropriate document control procedures. So documentation is what the heart of this implementation and operation of the EMS, and these documented procedures for operational controls and communicated emergency response procedures are to be included in. Then there is a fourth phase, checking and corrective actions. So here it is just a procedure including uh, various procedures for regular monitoring and measurement of key characteristics of the operation and the activities which are going to affect the environment. It also includes the procedure for dealing with situation of non-conformity or specific record maintenance procedures, and also the auditing procedure for the performance of EMS. And to have a better check over it, there is a fifth phase, which is the management review. So, periodic management review of the overall EMS is essential, and it will ensure its suitability, even the adequacy and effectiveness in light of changing circumstances. Because you can see it is the structured process. It EMS provides a structured process for the achievement of continual improvement. It also you can see the suggested the rate and extent. It can suggest the rate and extent of which is determined by the organization in view of the economic and the other circumstances. We also know that improvement in the environmental performance is always necessary, and it can be expected due to the adoption of a systematic approach. So EMS is what? It is the tool which help the organization to achieve and systematically control the level of environmental performance than it sets itself in the environmental policy. So the establishment of EMS will not necessarily result in the immediate reduction of adverse impact. No immediate outcome you can see here with the implementation of the EMS, but it is the periodically improving process, and the results and the outcome will be reflected after some long duration. So care need to be taken that the only mere establishment of the EMS does not fulfill all the organization's goal. So they don't have to be in a false sense of security. Implementation is also to be equipped with corrective actions, and then management review is essential so that all the flaws could be detected and the target could be modified or rectified. But if this EMS is effectively used, it enables an organization to improve its environmental performance and also help to avoid or reduce the adverse environmental impacts over the time. Number of times organization has the freedom and flexibility to define the boundaries of their system. So they may choose to implement an EMS throughout the entire organization, or they may adopt the EMS within the specific operating units or activities of the organization. So it is not necessary that entire organization should have the EMS certification. It can be applied to a single unit or a single organization structure. So if it is implemented for a specific operating unit or activity, policies and procedure developed for other parts of the organization, because these if it is for the single unit, we know that it is obvious other units are going to affect the performance of that units. So policies and procedure developed by other parts of the organization can be used to meet the requirements of that specific operating unit. And also the level of detail and complexity of the environmental management system or EMS, the extent of the documentation and the resource dedicated are totally dependent on the size of the organization. So particularly for this case will happen with the small and medium sized enterprises. Now integration of all these environmental matters with the overall management system. You can see the figure here. It will contribute to the effective implementation of the EMS. It will improve the efficiency and also it will define the clarity of roles. Here, in many aspects, the ISO 14001 standard, because it shares the common management system principle with the ISO 9000 series. Management system principle will remain same because they are getting the feedback from the checking and corrective actions, and accordingly they are making the suggestions to improve the environmental policy, and there it will be a quality policy in 9000 series. And in the beginning of these ISO 14001 standards, when you read the document, you will find it in our website gov.in. What is ISO 14000 standard? So in the initial page, it says that the organization may elect to use an existing management system which is very consistent with the ISO 9000 series because it has the basis for its environmental management system. Even the municipalities are adopting the ISO 14000 series. manufacturing industry, municipalities, small scale, large scale organizations, service providers. So they are having the impact or interaction with the environment, and they can easily obtain the ISO standards to meet their demands. Let us come to the slides now. We are having very few minutes. This is all we have already discussed with explanation of this implementation. It contains this points: structure, training, documentation, control, and emergency preparedness. Taking and corrective action is this management review. So management are ensuring the continuing suitability of the EMS. They consider the audit results, changing circumstances, commitment to continual improvement, and accordingly address possible changes to the environmental policy and targets and objectives. These are the benefits and the concerns of ISO 14000. What are the benefits you will get? It will help the organization because they are adopting the international standards which will level the playing field, means equality is going to be established. You are now at a global platform. Once you get the ISO 14000 certification, it will reduce the duplicity, conflicting requirements of different markets, because already we are adapting some of the practices. Maybe the same practice is adopted in other nations, and we are using the different practice for the same process. So that duplicity can be reduced. It will satisfy the stakeholders' interest, also lower the insurance rates due to due diligence, and internal benefits like reduction in the process cost, pollution prevention, not end of the pipe. All these are the benefits of the ISO 14000. Not only limited to this one, but various benefits are there. There are the concerns about the implementation of EMS, like increased cost. It will create the trade barriers and does not trade barriers sometimes. Do not ensure better environmental performance. Registration issue is there, inconsistent interpretation of the standards because of the lacunas in some clauses. This is about the ISO 14000 and its implementation. We have seen the basic structure to it, and in the next class we will discuss about how to get the certificate of the EMS. Okay, let's stop here then. It's already 10:15.